Prescott's morning sun slanted through the church vestibule windows when Mrs. Alina Hadley pressed her ruler against the subscription list and drew a single black line through Prudence Voss's name, the pen scratching loud enough that 3 women turning the pages of hymnals looked up to witness it. Prudence stood there with her reticule clutched in both hands, watching the careful way Mrs. Hadley's mouth curved upward at the corners as she finished the task, the way she blew gently on the wet ink, the way she closed the ledger with a soft thump that sounded like a coffin lid in the quiet space. "I am sorry, dear, but you understand, Mrs. Hadley said, not sounding sorry at all, and Prudence understood perfectly that 6 weeks in a camp full of horse thieves had made her something this town would no longer touch. Never mind that she had walked out of those hills on feet so torn and blistered that Dr. Brennan had wrapped them in bandages that still showed pink stains when she changed them each night. She turned and walked back out into the September heat, past the women who pulled their skirts aside as though ruin were something catching, past the men who looked everywhere but at her face. The Arizona Territory sun beat down on Prescott's Main Street, on the false-fronted buildings and the dust that rose from every footfall, and Prudence walked the 3 blocks to the boarding house where Mrs. Chen had been kind enough not to evict her, though the other boarders now took their meals an hour before or after she came down. Her room was small and hot and looked out over the alley, where the greengrocer threw his spoiled vegetables, and she sat on the edge of her narrow bed wondering what a woman did, when she had been ruined at 22 with no family and no prospects, and no way to earn her bread in a town that had already decided what she was worth. The knock came just after dawn the next morning, and Mrs. Chen's voice through the door said, "Miss Voss, there is a man downstairs asking for you," in a tone that suggested she expected Prudence to confirm every bad thing the town suspected. But when Prudence came down the stairs in her cleanest shirtwaist and her second-best skirt, the man waiting in Mrs. Chen's parlor was Garrett Nash, the blacksmith who owned the biggest forge in Prescott and ran 300 head of cattle on good grazing land south of town. A man respected and needed by everyone from the mine owners to the ranchers, to the wives who wanted ornamental ironwork on their garden gates. He stood when she entered, hat in his hands, a man in his middle 30s with shoulders built by hammering iron and a face that had been weathered honest by sun and work. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice low and even, "I need someone to keep my books. My last clerk went to California, and I am drowning in receipts and orders I cannot track. The job pays $30 a month, 6 days a week, 8 to 4. You would work in the office attached to the forge, and you can start today if you are willing." Prudence stared at him, trying to understand the trick or the trap, but his gray eyes were steady and his hands were still on his hat, and he waited as though he had asked her a reasonable question that deserved a considered answer. "Mr. Nash," she said slowly, "you know what people are saying about me." "I know what they are saying," he agreed. "I need a bookkeeper who can do figures and write a clear hand. I have seen your work at the feed store before all this happened. Are you willing or not?" She thought about Mrs. Hadley's smile and the women pulling their skirts away, and the empty days stretching ahead with nothing but a dwindling purse and nowhere to go. "I am willing," she said, and his mouth moved in what might have been the beginning of a smile before he nodded and settled his hat back on his head. "Then come with me now, and I will show you what needs doing," he said, and walked out the door expecting her to follow, which she did, out into the morning where the street was already busy with freight wagons and riders and people doing their business. He walked right down the center of the main street with her beside him, not hurrying, not hiding, and Prudence felt every eye in Prescott turn toward them as they passed the general store and the hotel and the land office. Garrett Nash did not look left or right, just walked steady, and even until they reached the forge at the corner of Montezuma Street, where the heat from the banked coals rolled out in waves and the smell of hot metal and coal smoke filled the air. The office was a lean-to room built onto the side of the forge, with a desk and a chair and a window that looked out onto the street. Shelves lined two walls, sagging under the weight of ledgers and papers and boxes of receipts that had been stuffed in no particular order. "It is a mess," Garrett said, sounding almost apologetic. "I am better with iron than I am with paper. The ledgers are there, the current accounts are somewhere in those boxes, and people come by to settle their bills or place new orders most days. Can you make sense of it?" Prudence set down her reticule and looked at the chaos with the first stirring of something like purpose she had felt in weeks. "I can make sense of it," she said, and he nodded once and left her to it, going back into the forge where she could hear the clang of his hammer starting up a rhythm that would last all day. She worked through the morning sorting receipts and matching them to ledger entries, rebuilding the record of his business from the jumble he had let it become. It was detailed work that required concentration, and she was grateful for it. Grateful for something to do with her hands and her mind that was not remembering the camp in the hills, or the way the thieves had laughed, or the long walk down through the pine forests with no shoes and no food, and the certainty that she would die before she reached town. She had not died, which meant she had to keep living, and living required eating, which required money, which required work. Garrett Nash had given her work, and she did not let herself think too hard about why. People came to the forge all day, ranchers and miners and townsmen, and she heard them talking with Garrett about projects and repairs and horses that needed shoeing. Some of them peered through the office window and saw her there at the desk, and she heard the conversations pause and then resume in lower tones. Nobody came into the office. Garrett brought her a sandwich at noon, setting it on the desk without comment, and she ate it while reconciling 3 months of accounts that he had estimated rather than recorded. The afternoon was hotter and the forge was hotter still, and when 4 o'clock came she had cleared one shelf and brought 2 ledgers up to date, and left a list of discrepancies that needed his attention. Garrett came into the office wiping his hands on a rag, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and looked at what she had accomplished with something like relief in his eyes. "That is more than I hoped for," he said. "Can you come back tomorrow?" "Yes," Prudence said, because there was nothing else to say and nowhere else to go, and because $30 a month was survival. She gathered her reticule and stepped out onto the street where the late sun turned everything gold and harsh, and walked back to the boarding house with her head up and her spine straight, though she could feel the weight of every stare that followed her. Days became weeks and the work became routine. She arrived at 8 when the forge was just heating up and left at 4 when the light began to slant long across the street. Garrett Nash was not a talkative man. He answered questions about the business when she asked them, told her what she needed to know about customers and credit and standing orders, but he did not make conversation, and he did not ask her questions about herself. They worked in parallel, him at the forge and her at the desk, and if he noticed that no one came into the office to settle their bills anymore, but instead called him outside to handle their business where they did not have to see her, he did not mention it. She learned things about him anyway, the way you learn about anyone you see 6 days a week. He was up before dawn every morning because she could hear the forge already going when she arrived. He did beautiful work, iron scrolled and shaped into patterns that were both strong and lovely. He was patient with customers, even when they changed their minds 3 times about what they wanted. But she never heard him patient with himself. And when a piece did not come out right, he would heed it and hammer it again with a grim focus that suggested he was working out something that had nothing to do with iron. He had a horse, a big bay gelding named Rust, that he spoke to more gently than he spoke to any human being. He lived in a house behind the forge, a small, neat place she glimpsed through the back door, and as far as she could tell he lived there alone. October came and the heat broke and the aspens up in the hills turned gold. Prudence had sorted the entire backlog of papers, and the books were current and accurate, and she had started tracking inventory and costs in a way that let Garrett see exactly where his money was going. He looked at the reports she prepared and nodded and said, "This is useful," which from him seemed like high praise. His business was good. People needed him too much to let gossip interfere, but she noticed that the ones who had been friendliest before now kept their conversations short and their eyes averted, and she understood that employing her had cost him something in the complicated social economy of a territorial town. She did not know why he had done it. She had tried to convince herself it was simply practical, that he needed a bookkeeper and she could do the work, but practical men did not usually offer help to ruined women when doing so made their own lives harder. She would catch him sometimes standing in the door of the forge looking toward the office with an expression she could not quite read, something almost angry but not directed at her, and then he would turn back to his work, as though he had settled something in his mind. The first time he spoke to her about anything other than business was a morning in late October when she arrived to find him standing in the office looking at the shelf of ledgers she had organized. "My sister kept books like this," he said abruptly, not looking at her. She had a head for figures and a tidy hand. She could have run a business twice this size and not broken a sweat. Prudence set down her reticule carefully, hearing something in his voice that made her think of deep water and thin ice. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Dead," Garrett said, flat and final. 15 years dead in a wagon camp in Kansas of a fever that killed her in 3 days. He turned then and looked at Prudence straight on. She was 19, and the town we lived in decided she had been seen in places a decent girl did not go, with men a decent girl did not speak to. It was gossip, the kind of vicious small-town gossip that starts because someone is bored or jealous or just plain mean. But it did not matter that it was lies. The church elders came to my father and said she was not welcome anymore. The women cut her dead in the street. Someone threw a rock through her window with a note tied to it that called her things I will not repeat. My father was a coward and told her to go stay with our aunt in Missouri until it blew over. She left on a Wednesday and the fever took her before she got 100 miles, and I was working a cattle drive in Texas and did not even know she was sick until 2 weeks after they buried her. His voice had not changed, still flat and even, but his hands were fists at his sides. I got back to Kansas, and my father was ashamed to look at me, and the town was sorry, the way people are sorry when they realize they killed someone with gossip and there is nothing they can do to take it back. I left and I have not been back. I came out here and I learned a trade and I made myself useful because useful men get left alone. But I remember what it looks like when a whole town decides someone is ruined, and I remember that it does not matter if they are wrong, because by the time they figure it out the person is already dead. Prudence stood very still, understanding suddenly why he had offered her the job, why he walked down the street with her in plain view, why he did not flinch when people stopped coming into the office. "I am sorry about your sister," she said quietly, and meant it down to her bones. Garrett looked at her and something in his face eased slightly. "So am I," he said. "Every day I am sorry, but I will not watch it happen again and do nothing." He walked past her then, back out to the forge, and she stood in the office for a long moment before she sat down at the desk and opened the ledger, and tried to focus on numbers that kept blurring in front of her eyes. November brought rain, cold, slanting storms that turned the streets to mud and made the forge hiss and steam when drops found their way through the roof. Prudence had been working for Garrett for 2 months and had saved almost all her salary because there was nothing to spend it on and nowhere to go. The town had not warmed to her. If anything, the coldness had calcified into a permanent structure, the way ice formed on a pond and thickened until you could walk on it. She was ruined and employed by a man who should know better, and that was all there was to say about Prudence Voss. The news came on a wet Thursday morning that the territorial marshal had captured the horse thief gang in a canyon up near Jerome and was bringing them back to Prescott for trial. Prudence heard it from Mrs. Chen, who told her with a kind of grim satisfaction that suggested justice was finally being done, though justice for what and for whom she did not specify. Prudence felt her stomach drop away and her hands go cold, because she had spent 2 months trying not to think about those men and that camp, and now they were coming here, where she would have to see them and they would see her, and whatever fragile piece she had built would shatter. She went to work anyway because there was nowhere else to be, and she sat at the desk and stared at the ledger without seeing it until Garrett came into the office and closed the door behind him. "You heard," he said, and it was not a question. "I heard," Prudence said. Her voice sounded strange and far away. Garrett pulled the other chair around and sat down across from her, his knees almost touching hers in the small space. "They will want you to testify," he said. "They will ask you what happened in that camp. You do not have to do it. You do not owe this town anything." Prudence looked at him, at the gray eyes that were steady and serious and not looking away. "If I do not testify, people will say it is because I have something to hide," she said. "They will say I was there willingly, that I rode with them, that I am exactly what they think I am." "People are already saying that," Garrett said bluntly. "Testifying will not change their minds. It will only make you relive things you have been trying to forget." "And if I do not, those men might go free," Prudence said. She could hear her own heart beating too fast. "They took me off the road when I was coming back from my cousin's ranch. They kept me in that camp for 6 weeks. They said things and did things, and I survived by being quiet and small and useful enough that they did not bother to tie me up anymore. And then one night they were all drunk and I walked away into the dark, and I kept walking until I got here. If my testimony helps hang them, then I will give it." Garrett looked at her for a long moment, and something passed across his face that might have been respect or sorrow or some complicated mixture of both. "Then I will be there when you do," he said. "You will not have to stand alone." The preliminary hearing was set for the following Monday in the courthouse, which was a generous name for the timber frame building that served as courtroom, land office, and tax collection point. The territorial marshal was a weathered man named Pike, who looked at Prudence with weary sympathy, and told her that the gang's leader, a man named Jack Cutler, was claiming she had been a willing participant, a camp woman who stayed because she wanted to. "He is trading stories for his neck," Marshal Pike said, "trying to implicate anyone he can think of to make a deal. You do not need to worry. We know what you are." Except they did not know, not really, and Prudence could see in the marshal's eyes that he half believed Cutler's story, or at least was not sure enough to dismiss it. She was ruined already. Why not ruined all the way down? The hearing was public, and the courtroom was full. Every seat taken and people standing along the walls, because there was nothing Prescott liked better than a spectacle, and a ruined woman having to describe her ruin was spectacle enough for a month of gossip. Prudence sat in the front row with Garrett beside her, his presence solid and silent. The gang was brought in shackled, 6 men in dirty clothes with mean eyes and meanness baked into their faces. Jack Cutler was in the middle, a tall man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and when he saw Prudence he smiled slow and deliberate. She made herself look back at him and not flinch, though her hands were knotted together in her lap, so hard her knuckles were white. The judge was a circuit man named Howell who had a reputation for fairness and a face like a hatchet. He called Prudence to the stand and swore her in, and she sat in the hard chair with every eye in the room on her and tried to remember how to breathe. Judge Howell asked her to describe the events starting from the day she was taken, and she began to speak, her voice low but steady. She told them about riding back from her cousin's ranch outside Skull Valley, about the men who came out of the trees and dragged her off her horse, about the camp in the hills where they kept stolen horses and planned their raids. She told them about being kept there, about the work they made her do cooking and mending, about the things they said, and the way they looked at her, and the night one of them came to her with intentions she knew would end with her dead. She told them how she had hit him with a cook pot hard enough to lay him out cold, and how Jack Cutler had laughed and said she had saved him the trouble of killing the man himself for breaking the camp rules, and how after that they watched her less carefully, because she had proven she would not scream or run or cause trouble that might bring the law. She told them about walking away in the dark, about 20 miles on foot through country full of lions and bears and men worse than either, about reaching Prescott with her feet bleeding and her dress in rags, and every expectation that she would find safety. And then she stopped talking because the rest of it, the part where the town decided she was ruined and cut her off from every respectable space, was not relevant to the trial of horse thieves, though it was relevant to everything else about her life. Jack Cutler's lawyer, a thin, nervous man from Phoenix, asked her if it was true that she had not been tied up. She said it was true. He asked if it was true that she had done camp chores and cooked meals. She said it was true. He asked if it was true that she had struck one of the gang members. She said it was true and explained why, and the lawyer moved on quickly. He asked if anyone had forced her to stay after the first week. She looked at him and said, "I was 20 miles from anywhere in country I did not know, with no horse, no weapon, no food, and no shoes." The forcing was in the circumstance, not in the shackles. The lawyer sat down and Jack Cutler stopped smiling. Mrs. Eleanor Hadley had been appointed by the court to take notes as a witness to the testimony, which meant the woman who had scratched Prudence's name from the church list was now sitting 3 feet away recording every word of Prudence's humiliation in her tidy script. When the judge dismissed Prudence from the stand, Mrs. Hadley looked up from her paper and their eyes met, and Prudence saw something flicker across the older woman's face that might have been discomfort or shame, though it was gone too quickly to be sure. Garrett was waiting when she stepped down, and he walked her out of the courtroom into the November cold. They did not go back to the forge. He walked her instead to the edge of town where the land opened up, and you could see the hills rolling away toward the mountains, and they stood there not talking while the wind moved through the dry grass, and the sky went gray with the promise of rain. "You did well," Garrett said finally. "I told the truth," Prudence said. "I do not know if it will matter." "It will matter to the judge," Garrett said. "It will matter to the jury. It will not matter to the people who have already made up their minds, but those people do not deserve to matter to you." Prudence looked at him, at the profile of his face against the sky, and something shifted inside her, some locked place beginning to ease open. "Why do you care?" she asked, and it was the question she had been holding since the morning he offered her the job. Garrett turned to face her fully, and his expression was open in a way she had not seen before, all the careful walls he kept up worn down by the moment. Because I could not save my sister, and I have been angry about it for 15 years, he said. Because you deserved better than what this town gave you and someone needed to say so. Because you are smart and brave, and you survived something that would have broken most people. And you came to work every day and did your job and did not complain or give up. And because somewhere in the last 2 months, I stopped thinking of you as the woman I was helping and started thinking of you as the woman I wanted to know. And then the woman I looked forward to seeing. And now the woman I cannot stop thinking about even when I am trying to focus on anything else. Prudence stared at him, the words rearranging everything she thought she understood. You are thinking about me, she said carefully, trying to make sense of it. Constantly, Garrett said, and there was a wry twist to his mouth that made him look younger. In ways that are probably not appropriate for an employer to think about an employee. I am not asking you for anything. You have had enough of men assuming they have a right to your time or your attention. I just thought you should know that when I look at you, I do not see anything ruined. I see a woman I would be proud to stand beside for the rest of my life if she were ever inclined to let me. The rain started then, cold drops that came down slow at first and then faster, and Prudence felt them on her face and in her hair and did not move. I do not know how to do this, she said. I do not know how to be the person someone wants when the whole world has decided I am not worth wanting. Garrett stepped closer, near enough that she could see the rain on his eyelashes and the way his jaw was set with determination. Then we figure it out together, he said. And we tell the world to go hang. She kissed him then, standing in the rain at the edge of town with the whole sky opening up above them. It was not graceful or practiced, just a need to be close to someone who saw her truly and did not look away. He kissed her back carefully, his hands coming up to frame her face, and when they broke apart they were both breathing hard and the rain was soaking through their clothes. We should go in, Garrett said, but neither of them moved. We should, Prudence agreed, and then kissed him again because the world had already decided who she was, and there was a freedom in that, a reckless space where she could do what she wanted, because there was nothing left to lose. They went back to the forge eventually, wet and cold and something between them now that had not been there before. The trial continued through the week, and the jury found the gang guilty on all counts. Jack Cutler was sentenced to hang and the others to long terms in the territorial prison, and Prescott was satisfied that justice had been served. But the story Cutler had told in his testimony, the one about Prudence being a willing participant, had legs of its own. It did not matter that the jury had not believed him. It did not matter that the judge had dismissed it as the obvious lies of a desperate man. The story was out and the town took it and worried it like a dog with a bone, until people who had never spoken to Prudence were certain they knew exactly what kind of woman she was. Business at the forge started to fall off. Not all at once, but steadily. Customers who found reasons to take their work to the blacksmith in Prescott Valley, or decided to wait on projects they had been planning. Garrett did not mention it, but Prudence saw it in the books, the drop in orders and commissions, the spaces in the schedule that used to be full. She knew it was because of her, and she told him so one evening after the forge had closed, standing in the office with the lamps lit against the early dark. You are losing customers because of me, she said. Because you hired me, because you defended me, because people have seen us together and they know you care about me. I should leave. I should go somewhere else and you can tell people I ran off and you were deceived like everyone else, and your business will come back. Garrett looked at her like she had suggested burning down the forge. No, he said, simple and flat. You have worked 15 years to build this business, Prudence said. I will not let you lose it because of me. "It is my business and my choice," Garrett said. He crossed the space between them and took her hands in his grip warm and solid. "I did not hire you to be kind. I did not defend you to make a point. I did it because it was right, and because I wanted to know you, and I have gotten to know you, and I was correct. You are exactly the woman I thought you were, which is the woman I mean to marry if you will have me." Prudence felt the words hit her like a physical thing, her breath catching in her throat. "You cannot mean that," she said. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Garrett said. "I know this is fast. I know we have only been courting a few weeks, and that is if you count standing in the rain kissing as courting. But I am 36 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are strong and smart, and you do not give up, and when I think about the future, the only version of it that makes sense is one where you are in it. So I am asking you, Prudence Voss, will you marry me?" She thought about the town and the gossip, and the life he was offering her, which was a life beside someone who chose her deliberately and without reservation. She thought about his sister who died because no one stood up for her, and about Garrett who had spent 15 years making himself useful to people he did not forgive, and about the fact that he was willing to lose it all for her. And she thought about herself, about the woman she had been before the thieves took her, and the woman she was now, and the fact that she had survived, and that surviving meant she got to choose what came next. "Yes," she said, and his face broke into a smile that transformed him, made him look younger and lighter and like someone who had just been given an unexpected gift. They married 2 weeks later in the judge's chambers with Marshal Pike and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Mrs. Chen cried, and the marshal shook Garrett's hand and said, "You are a better man than most, Nash." And they walked out into the December cold as husband and wife. There was no reception because there was no one to invite who would come. But Garrett cooked dinner in the house behind the forge, which turned out to be larger and more comfortable than Prudence had thought, with good furniture and a kitchen that had clearly been designed by someone who knew how to use it. "My sister taught me to cook," Garrett said, watching Prudence look around the space. "She said a man who could not feed himself was just a child in a larger body. I have been cooking for myself for 15 years, and I have gotten decent at it." They ate roasted chicken and potatoes and greens, and Prudence thought it was possibly the best meal she had ever had, not because of the food, but because of the man across the table who looked at her like she was something precious. Afterward, he showed her the rest of the house, the bedroom with the large bed and the quilts his sister had made, the sitting room with the shelf of books, the room in the back that was full of pieces of ironwork he had made for himself, decorative things that had no purpose but beauty. "I did not know you made these," Prudence said, picking up a small iron bird with outstretched wings. "I do not sell them," Garrett said. "They are just something I do when I need to think. My sister used to say I worked my feelings out through my hands, that I could not talk about things, but I could hammer them into shape." Prudence set the bird down carefully and turned to him. "What are you feeling now?" she asked. "Grateful," Garrett said immediately. "Grateful and lucky and somewhat terrified that I will do something to mess this up." "You will not," Prudence said, and crossed the space between them. "You are the best man I have ever known, Garrett Nash, and I am the lucky one." They came together, then in the room full of iron birds and scrollwork, kissing with the kind of desperation that came from having wanted something for a long time, and finally being allowed to have it. He was careful with her, almost tentative, and she realized he was worried about her, about what she had survived in the camp and whether she could bear to be touched. "I am not broken," she told him, her hands on his face. "They did not break me. And I want this, I want you. So please do not treat me like I am made of glass." He kissed her again then, less carefully, and she responded with everything she had, all the want and need and relief of being seen and chosen. They found their way to the bedroom and the bed his sister had made, and Prudence discovered that intimacy with someone who loved you was an entirely different thing from violence, that it could be tender and fierce and utterly consuming, and that she was not ruined at all, just a woman learning what it meant to be wanted by a good man. The news that Garrett Nash had married Prudence Voss spread through Prescott faster than a fire in dry grass. People were shocked and scandalized and secretly thrilled to have something new to talk about through the long winter. The businesses that had been taking their work elsewhere doubled down, determined to punish Garrett for his choice. By January, his custom was down by more than half, and Prudence lay awake at night listening to him breathe and trying to figure out how to fix what she had broken. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marshal Pike stopped by the forge on a cold morning in late January with a freighter named Tom Donovan, a grizzled man who ran supply routes between Prescott and Phoenix. "Tell them what you told me," Pike said to Donovan, and the freighter looked uncomfortable but spoke up anyway. "I was hauling goods up from Phoenix in early September," Donovan said. "Stopped to water the horses at a creek about 15 miles south of here and found a woman's shoe in the grass. Just one, like it had been lost in a hurry. Thought it was strange, but I was on a schedule and kept going. 2 days later, I heard about Miss Voss here turning up in town with a story about escaping from horse thieves, and I got to thinking about that shoe. Then I was hauling goods through Skull Valley last week and stopped at the ranch where Miss Voss's cousin lives, and the cousin told me Miss Voss had set out for home on the 8th of September wearing a blue dress and brown shoes. I still had that shoe in my wagon because I am a pack rat and I do not throw things away, and the cousin identified it as belonging to Miss Voss, which means she was telling the truth about being taken on the road, because she lost that shoe 20 miles from anywhere, and it was right where she said she was grabbed." Prudence stared at him, this man she had never met who had been carrying around her lost shoe for 5 months and had bothered to check the story. Marshal Pike cleared his throat. "I am going to include this in my report to the territorial governor," he said. "And I am going to make sure Judge Howell knows about it. I apologize, Mrs. Nash, for not believing you sooner." After they left, Garrett turned to Prudence with a look of grim satisfaction. "So the truth comes out," he said. "The town will have to admit they were wrong." But the town was slow to admit anything. A few people heard about Donovan's testimony and chose to believe it, and a few more heard and dismissed it as inconclusive. And most people simply did not hear, because gossip that confirmed what you already believed traveled faster than gossip that contradicted it. February came and business stayed slow, and Garrett's expression got tighter and more closed, the way it had been before Prudence knew him. She hated seeing it, hated knowing that his choice to marry her was costing him everything he had built. The breaking point came on a morning in late February when the town council offered Garrett the position of constable. It was a paid position, respectable and permanent, and it would have supplemented the forge income enough to make up for the lost business. The council chairman, a banker named Morrison, came to the forge himself to make the offer, and Prudence watched from the office as the two men talked in the yard. She could not hear the words, but she saw Morrison gesturing and Garrett standing very still, and then she saw Garrett shake his head once, sharp and definite. Morrison said something else and Garrett replied, and whatever he said made Morrison's face go red before he turned and stalked away. Garrett came into the office and shut the door and stood there with his jaw clenched so hard Prudence could see the muscle jumping. "What did he say?" she asked. "He offered me the constable job on condition that I set you aside," Garrett said, his voice flat with rage. He said the town would be willing to overlook my poor judgment if I corrected my mistake, that a man in a position of authority needed a wife beyond reproach, and that if I was willing to quietly dissolve the marriage, they would make it worth my while. He suggested you could go to California, and I could tell people you died, and everyone would understand, and I would be welcomed back into respectable society. Prudence felt cold all over, the kind of cold that started in your bones and spread outward. What did you say? I told him that you are my wife, and I chose you knowing exactly what I was doing, and that I would rather lose every customer and every shred of respect in this town than lose you, Garrett said. I told him that if Prescott's definition of respectable required me to abandon the woman I love, then Prescott could keep its respect and its constable job, and I would find somewhere else to live. You told him we would leave, Prudence said slowly. I did, Garrett said, because I meant it. This town has taken everything from you and asked you to be grateful. It has punished me for standing beside you, and I am done. I am done being useful to people who do not deserve it. I am done living in a place where the worst parts of human nature get to decide who is valuable. We can go somewhere else, start over, build something that is ours and not dependent on the goodness of people who have none. Prudence crossed to him and took his hands, feeling the calluses from years of working iron, the strength in his fingers. Where would we go? She asked. I have been thinking about that, Garrett said. The stage road between here and Phoenix is growing. More people are moving through, more freight, more travelers who need places to stop. There is a spot about halfway, good water and flat ground, where someone could build a way station. We could buy the land, build a station house, offer meals and rooms and a place to change horses. We would not need the town's approval, just people who are passing through and do not care about our history. Prudence thought about it, about leaving Prescott and the weight of its judgment, about building something new where no one knew what had happened or who she was supposed to be. It would be hard work, she said. Harder than what we are doing now, Garrett agreed, but it would be ours. No one could take it from us or make it conditional on being someone we are not. Then let us do it, Prudence said. Let us leave. They made their plans quietly through March. Garrett sold the forge to a buyer from Phoenix who did not care about local gossip, sold it for a fair price, and shook hands on the deal. He sold the house too, and the cattle, liquidating everything he had built over 15 years. Prudence helped him sort through what to keep and what to sell, packing up the tools and the ironwork and his sister's quilts. They bought a wagon and a team of horses, filed a claim on the land Garrett had scouted halfway to Phoenix, and told no one they were leaving until the day before they planned to go. The news that Garrett Nash was abandoning Prescott caused a stir. Some people were glad to see him go, confirmation that he had been a bad element all along. Others were uncomfortable, recognizing perhaps that they had driven away a skilled blacksmith and a decent man. A few people came by the forge to try to talk him out of it, offering apologies that were 3 months too late and assurances that things would get better. Garrett listened politely and did not change his mind. Mrs. Eleanor Hadley came by on the last afternoon, finding Prudence alone in the office wrapping ledgers in oilcloth for the journey. The older woman stood in the doorway looking uncertain, a rare expression on a face usually so sure of itself. Mrs. Nash, she said, and the use of the married name was deliberate. May I speak with you? Prudence straightened up, wary but willing to listen. Of course. Mrs. Hadley came into the office and closed the door behind her. She looked older than Prudence remembered, the lines around her mouth deeper, and she did not meet Prudence's eyes when she began to speak. I owe you an apology, she said. I was at that hearing. I heard your testimony and I wrote it down word for word, and I knew while I was writing it that you were telling the truth. I knew that we had judged you wrongly, that the town had been cruel for no reason except that cruelty is easier than kindness, and I did nothing. I went home and I said nothing, and I let people keep saying terrible things about you because I did not want to be the one to admit we were wrong. I scratched your name off the subscription list, and I felt righteous doing it, and I was a coward and a fool. Prudence looked at her, at the woman who had smiled while ruining her, and tried to decide if the apology mattered. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because you are leaving and I may not have another chance," Mrs. Hadley said. "Because I have not been able to sleep properly since I realized what we did to you, and I thought if I apologized it might help, which is selfish of me, I know. You do not owe me forgiveness." "No, I do not," Prudence agreed. She thought about the months of isolation and cold looks, about Garrett losing his business, about all the ways the town had made them pay for the crime of surviving and choosing each other. But she also thought about the woman standing in front of her looking genuinely ashamed, and about the fact that holding on to anger was like holding on to a hot coal. "I do not forgive you," she said slowly, "but I understand that people make mistakes, and that admitting them takes a kind of courage. Maybe someday I will be able to forgive you, but not today." Mrs. Hadley nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That is more than I deserve," she said. "I hope your new life is everything you want it to be, Mrs. Nash. Truly." She left then, and Prudence went back to wrapping ledgers, and when Garrett came in an hour later she told him about the conversation. He listened without comment and then said, "Do you wish we were staying?" "No," Prudence said immediately. "Her apology does not undo the harm. And even if the whole town apologized tomorrow, it would be because we are leaving, not because they actually changed their minds about who we are. I want to go somewhere new and build something that is ours." They left Prescott the next morning at dawn, the wagon loaded with tools and supplies and everything they needed to start over. A few people were up early and watched them go, but no one tried to stop them or wish them well. The town receded behind them as the sun came up, and Prudence did not look back. The land Garrett had claimed was a full day's travel south, following the stage road through high desert country where the air was thin and clear, and the sky went on forever. They reached it in the late afternoon, a flat stretch near a reliable creek with good grass, and a stand of cottonwood trees that would provide shade. It was empty and quiet and full of possibility. They spent the spring building. Garrett had sold the forge, but he had kept his tools, and he worked from dawn to dark cutting timber and raising walls, building a station house that was long and low and sturdy, with a big kitchen and a dining room that could seat 20 and 4 small bedrooms for travelers. Prudence worked beside him, learning how to notch logs and drive nails and think in terms of structure and space. They hired 2 men from Phoenix to help with the heavy lifting, and by June the building was finished, roofed and chinked and ready. Prudence set up the kitchen with a big stove and good pots, and all the things she needed to cook for crowds. Garrett built tables and chairs and bed frames, simple functional furniture that would hold up to hard use. They dug a well and built a stable for changing out the stage horses, and a corral for their own stock. It was exhausting work, the kind that left you too tired to think, but it was also satisfying in a way Prudence had not expected, seeing something grow from nothing because of your own hands and effort. The first stage came through in July, the driver surprised to find a new way station where there had been nothing before. He paid for meals for himself and his passengers, and the passengers were grateful for hot food and a chance to stretch their legs. Word spread along the route that there was a new stop, well run and clean, and the stages started scheduling their trips to arrive at meal times. Freight wagons followed, and then riders traveling alone, and by August they were busy enough that Prudence had to plan meals days in advance to keep up with demand. She was a good cook, something she had learned from her mother before her parents died, and she took pride in serving food that was better than travelers expected. Roasted meats and fresh bread, vegetables from the garden she planted, pies made with dried fruit and honey. Garrett built a spring house to keep things cool and a smokehouse to preserve meat, and Prudence used both to make sure they could feed people even in the lean times. Travelers started commenting on the quality of the food and the cleanliness of the rooms, and more people came because of the reputation they were building. By September, they were making enough money to pay back Garrett's initial investment and start saving for expansions. They talked in the evenings after the work was done, sitting outside under the cottonwood trees and watching the stars come out, about building more rooms, about buying more horses, about maybe hiring help so that Prudence was not cooking for 20 people 3 times a day. Garrett put his arm around her and she leaned into his warmth and felt something she had not felt in more than a year, which was contentment. Not just survival, not just getting through the days, but actual happiness in the life they were building together. "You miss the forge?" she asked him one night. "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "I miss the work, the feeling of shaping iron, but I do not miss Prescott. I do not miss being useful to people who did not appreciate it. This is better. This is ours, and it is simple, and no one here cares what happened before we came." "I am glad we left," Prudence said. "I thought I would feel like we were running away, but it does not feel like that. It feels like we chose something better." "We did," Garrett said, and kissed the top of her head. Fall came and the weather turned cool and the stages kept coming. Prudence realized in October that her courses had not come in 2 months, and she told Garrett one evening, when they were alone in the kitchen after the last traveler had gone to bed. He stared at her for a long moment, and then a smile broke across his face, the kind of smile she had only seen a few times, unguarded and pure. "A baby," he said, as though testing the words. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Prudence confirmed, feeling the reality of it settle into her bones. "In the spring, I think. April or May." Garrett pulled her into his arms and held her tight, and Prudence felt his heart racing under her cheek. "I will build a cradle," he said. "And we will need to make one of the rooms into a nursery. And we should hire help now so you are not working so hard once you are further along." They did all of those things. Garrett hired a young woman named Sarah from a ranch nearby who needed work and was glad to have it. Sarah was cheerful and competent, and did not ask questions about Prudence and Garrett's history, just accepted the work and did it well. Garrett built a cradle in the evenings, beautiful carved wood that rocked gently, and Prudence sewed blankets and tiny clothes and tried not to worry about all the things that could go wrong. Winter was quiet, fewer travelers, and more time to prepare for the baby. Prudence's belly grew, and Garrett treated her like she was made of spun sugar, which she tolerated because she knew it came from love even if it was slightly ridiculous. Sarah took over more of the cooking as Prudence got larger and more uncomfortable, and Garrett finished the nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building shelves for the things a baby would need. The baby came in late April, a long, hard labor that left Prudence exhausted and Garrett pale with worry. But when it was over, and the midwife from the nearest ranch placed a tiny squalling girl in Prudence's arms, she looked down at the red, angry face and felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "She is perfect," Prudence said, and Garrett sat beside her on the bed and put his arm around both of them and did not say anything because he was crying too hard to speak. They named her Catherine, after Garrett's sister. She had dark hair like Prudence and gray eyes like Garrett, and she was loud and demanding and utterly wonderful. Prudence learned how to feed her and change her and function on almost no sleep, and Garrett learned how to hold her without looking terrified, and Sarah learned how to run the way station kitchen so that Prudence could spend the first few months focused on the baby. Catherine grew from a tiny squalling thing into a baby who smiled and laughed and reached for everything she saw. Travelers who stopped at the way station made a fuss over her, and she seemed to love the attention, gurgling happily at strangers and charming hardened freighters into smiling. Garrett made her toys, little carved animals that she would grasp in her fists and wave around, and Prudence sang to her in the evenings, old songs her mother had sung. By the time Catherine was 6 months old, the way station was thriving. They had built 4 more rooms to meet demand, and Garrett had hired 2 men to help with the horses and the stable work. The stage line had officially recognized them as a scheduled stop, which meant steady, reliable business. They were making enough money to be comfortable, to save, to think about the future without the constant edge of worry. Prudence thought sometimes about Prescott, about the people who had judged her and found her wanting, and she was grateful she was not there to see whatever vindication they might have eventually offered. She did not need their apology or their approval. She had built a life with a man who loved her and a daughter who was healthy and happy, and she had done it on her own terms in a place where no one cared what the town had called her. One afternoon in early November, a familiar face appeared at the way station. Marshal Pike, older and more weathered but still recognizable, climbed down from a stage and stretched his back. He saw Prudence and stopped, a smile crossing his face. "Mrs. Nash," he said, "I heard you and your husband had started a way station, but I did not realize it was this one. It is good to see you." "It is good to see you too, Marshal," Prudence said. She had Catherine on her hip and the baby was staring at the stranger with wide gray eyes. "This is Catherine." Pike looked at the baby and his expression softened. "She is beautiful. You have done well, Mrs. Nash. Both of you. I was sorry to see you leave Prescott, but I am glad to see you landed somewhere good." They talked while he ate, catching up on the news from Prescott. Jack Cutler had been hanged and the rest of the gang was in prison. The town had grown, new businesses and new people, and some of the old guard like Mrs. Hadley was less influential than they had been. "People still talk about you and Mr. Nash sometimes," Pike said carefully, "about how the town drove you out. There is some shame about it now, though it came too late to matter." "It did come too late," Prudence agreed, "but we are happy here. Happier than we would have been there, I think, so perhaps it worked out the way it was meant to." Pike nodded slowly. "Perhaps it did," he said. "You take care, Mrs. Nash, and if you are ever in Prescott and need anything, you let me know." "I will," Prudence said, though she had no intention of ever going back. The years passed in the way that years do when you are busy and happy, each season blending into the next. Catherine grew into a toddler and then a little girl, bright and curious, and full of questions about everything she saw. Prudence taught her to read using the books Garrett had brought from the old house, and Garrett taught her about horses and how to recognize the different birds that came to the creek. She was a child of the way station, growing up around travelers and stories, and she learned early how to talk to strangers and make them feel welcome. When Catherine was 3, Prudence realized she was pregnant again, and in the summer she delivered another daughter, a calm, quiet baby they named Sophia, who seemed content to watch the world from wherever you set her down. Catherine was fascinated by her baby sister and wanted to help with everything, bringing diapers and singing her own invented songs that made no sense, but that Sophia seemed to enjoy. The way station grew to accommodate the growing family and the growing business. Garrett built an addition onto the house so they had more private space, and he built a proper schoolroom where Prudence could teach the girls when they were old enough. Sarah had married one of the stable hands, and they lived in a small house Garrett built near the creek, and they helped run the way station as part of an extended family. By the time Catherine was 7 and Sophia was 4, the way station was a landmark on the Phoenix Road. People planned their trips around stopping there, knowing they would get good food and clean beds and friendly service. Prudence had expanded the menu, offering dishes that reminded travelers of home, and Garrett had built a reputation for being able to fix anything that broke on a wagon or a stage. Catherine helped in the kitchen, learning to cook from her mother, and she helped her father in the stable, learning how to care for horses and mend harness. She was a serious child, thoughtful and kind, and travelers often commented that she had her mother's strength and her father's steady nature. Sophia was quieter, a dreamer who liked to draw pictures of the things she saw, and Garrett carved her pencils from soft wood, and Prudence saved paper for her to use. They were happy. It was not a complicated happiness, not the kind built on wealth or status or what other people thought. It was the simple happiness of work you believed in, people you loved, and a place that was yours. Prudence thought sometimes about the girl she had been at 22, riding home from her cousin's ranch and having her life torn apart by violence and gossip. That girl had been fragile in ways she had not realized, dependent on the approval of a town that withdrew it the moment she was inconvenient. The woman she had become was not fragile. She had survived and built and loved, and she had learned that the only approval that mattered was her own. One evening when Catherine was 10 and Sophia was 7, they were all sitting outside under the cottonwoods after the day's work was done. The girls were playing with the kittens from the barn cat's latest litter, and Garrett had his arm around Prudence's shoulders. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" he asked her quietly. Prudence thought about it, about the path her life had taken and where it had brought her. "I regret what happened in the camp," she said. "I regret that I had to go through that. But I do not regret leaving Prescott, and I do not regret building this life with you. If I could go back and change things, I would not, because I might lose what we have now." "I feel the same," Garrett said. "I wish you had not been hurt. I wish the town had been kinder. But I do not wish I had made different choices, because every choice brought me here, with you and the girls and this place we built. I am grateful for that every day." Catherine looked up from where she was dangling a piece of grass for a kitten to chase. "Mother, why did you leave Prescott?" she asked. She had asked before, and they had given her simplified answers, but she was old enough now to understand more. Prudence glanced at Garrett, and he nodded slightly, trusting her to decide how much to say. "Something bad happened to me when I was younger," Prudence said carefully. "And instead of helping me, the people in the town I lived in blamed me for it. Your father was the only one who stood up for me, and because he did, people stopped doing business with him. So we decided to leave and build something new, somewhere people would not judge us for things that were not our fault." Catherine processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "That was not fair," she said finally. "No, it was not," Prudence agreed, "but life is not always fair. What matters is what you do when unfair things happen. You can let them destroy you, or you can survive them and build something better. Your father and I chose to build something better." "I am glad you did," Catherine said. "I like living here." "So do I," Sophia added, looking up from the picture she was drawing. "So do we," Garrett said, pulling Prudence closer. The girls went back to playing, and Prudence leaned into her husband's warmth, watching the last light fade from the sky. The stage would be through tomorrow, and there would be travelers to feed and rooms to prepare, and all the work that filled their days. But for now, in this moment, there was just the family they had made and the life they had chosen, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had done it right. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of the way station and the growth of their daughters. Catherine grew tall and capable, taking on more responsibility as she got older, learning to manage the kitchen and keep the books the way her mother had once kept books for a blacksmith in a town that did not deserve her. Sophia stayed quieter but developed a talent for making the travelers feel welcome, for listening to their stories and making them feel heard. Both girls learned early that their parents' love for each other, and for them, was the foundation everything else was built on, and they grew up secure in that knowledge. When Catherine was 16 and Sophia was 13, a woman arrived at the way station in a private carriage, well-dressed and clearly wealthy. She asked to speak with Prudence privately, and Prudence took her into the small office where she still kept the books. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Hadley Worthington, and it took Prudence a moment to make the connection. "You are Eleanor Hadley's daughter," Prudence said slowly. "I am," Margaret confirmed. "My mother passed away last year. Before she died, she asked me to find you and give you this." She held out a sealed letter, expensive paper with Prudence's name written in a shaky hand. Prudence took the letter but did not open it immediately. "Why?" she asked. "My mother carried a great deal of guilt about how she treated you," Margaret said quietly. She spoke of it often in her last years, about the woman she had wronged and the apology she had offered too late. She wanted you to know that she never stopped regretting it, and that she hoped you had found happiness despite what she did. Margaret paused. "I was a child when you lived in Prescott, but I remember my mother being different after you left. Less certain of herself, less quick to judge. I think what happened with you changed her, though it took her too long to realize it." Prudence set the letter down on the desk. "Thank you for bringing it," she said. "I hope your mother found peace." "I think she did at the end," Margaret said. "May I ask if you did find happiness?" "I did," Prudence said, and meant it completely. "I married a good man and we built a life together. We have 2 daughters and a business we are proud of. I am happier than I ever thought I would be when I left Prescott." Margaret smiled, and there was relief in it. "I am glad," she said. "Truly, my mother would have been glad too." After Margaret left, Prudence opened the letter. It was short, written in the uncertain hand of someone very ill, and it said simply, "I am sorry. I was wrong. I hope you have forgiven me or will someday, but I understand if you cannot. You deserved better than what I gave you. May your life be full of the kindness I failed to show. Eleanor Hadley." Prudence read it twice and then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with the other important papers. She did not know if she forgave Eleanor Hadley, even now. But she understood that the woman had carried the weight of her choices, and that seemed like enough. The past was done and could not be changed. What mattered was what she had built since then and who she had built it with. That evening she showed the letter to Garrett, and he read it in silence before handing it back. "Does it change anything?" he asked. "No," Prudence said. "It is just a confirmation of something I already knew, which is that people eventually figure out when they have been wrong. But by then, it is too late to matter to anyone but themselves." "You wish things had been different?" Garrett asked. "Only in that I wish I had not been hurt in the first place," Prudence said. "But everything after that, the way it unfolded, brought me here, and I would not trade here for anything." Garrett kissed her then, a soft kiss that still carried all the warmth and certainty of the man who had offered her a job on the main street in daylight when no one else would. "Neither would I," he said. The way station continued to thrive. Catherine eventually married a freighter who stopped regularly on his routes, a steady young man who loved her for her competence and her kindness. They built a house nearby, and Catherine continued to help run the way station while raising her own children. Sophia married a teacher who had come west for his health, and they moved to Phoenix where he taught school, and she illustrated books for children, using the skills she had developed drawing pictures of the world around the way station. Prudence and Garrett grew older together, their hair going gray and their hands showing the marks of decades of work. But they stayed strong and healthy, kept vital by the work they loved and the family they had built. The way station passed into Catherine's capable hands when Prudence and Garrett decided they were ready to step back, and it continued to be a landmark on the Phoenix Road, known for good food and fair dealing, and the story of how it had been built by two people who refused to let a town's judgment define them. On a spring evening when Prudence was 68 and Garrett was 72, they sat together under the cottonwoods that had grown tall and wide over the decades. Their granddaughter Josephine, Catherine's eldest daughter, was helping in the kitchen, and they could hear her laughing at something one of the travelers had said. The stage road was busier than ever, and the way station was full of life and noise and purpose. "Do you remember that morning I came to Mrs. Chen's boarding house?" Garrett asked, his hand finding Prudence's the way it always had. "Every detail," Prudence said. "I thought you were either crazy or playing some kind of cruel joke. I could not understand why you would hire me when everyone else had decided I was worthless." "You were never worthless," Garrett said. "You were the strongest person I had ever met, and you just did not know it yet." "I learned," Prudence said. "You taught me. You showed me that one person standing up makes all the difference, that I did not need a whole town's approval when I had yours." "We taught each other," Garrett corrected. "You taught me that it was possible to forgive myself for not saving my sister, that I could honor her memory by helping someone else instead of carrying anger forever. You taught me what love looks like when it is built on respect and choice." Prudence leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar shape of him, the solidity that had been her anchor for more than 40 years. "The whole town called me ruined," she said softly. "And I called you the woman I meant to marry," Garrett finished. "I was right and they were wrong, and I have never regretted being right." They sat together as the stars came out and the lamps were lit in the way station, casting warm light across the yard. Inside, Josephine was serving dinner to travelers who would never know the story of how this place came to be, who would only know that the food was good and the beds were clean and they were welcome here. And that was enough, Prudence thought. That was more than enough. They had built something that would outlast them, something good and true that had grown from the ruins of what a small-minded town had tried to destroy. The cowboy had called her the woman he meant to marry, and he had been right. She had been exactly that and more besides. She had been a survivor and a builder and a mother and a partner, and she had lived a life full of love and purpose, despite everything that had tried to break her. And when she looked back across the years, she could see the thread of it, the way each choice had led to the next, the way pain had transformed into strength and isolation into belonging. "I am happy," she said to Garrett, simple and true. "So am I," he said. "Every day I am happy." And they were, there under the cottonwoods with the way station lit up behind them and the whole wide territory stretching out in every direction, full of possibility and second chances, and the kind of happiness that had to be built by hand, one choice at a time, until it became a life worth living.